Welcome. This is the Fly Fishing Journeys podcast with host Rob Giannino, where we have great conversation with really awesome experts from within the fly fishing community. You see, the fly fishing lifestyle is a journey, and we're glad you're on this journey with us. Check out flyfishingjourneys.com for more podcasts, and please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. Here's your host, Rob Giannino.
All right, guys, welcome to the next edition of the Fly Fishing Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Rob Giannino, and I'm super excited to have John Field on our podcast today. He is both a professional fly fisherman and author. He's written some fantastic books. Number one is Fly Casting Finesse, the ACA's or American Casting Association's Beginner's Guide to Fly Casting, and also his latest book that had just come out, Fly Fishing for Trophy Striped Bass. John, welcome and thanks for being on our podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
My goodness, I can't wait to dive in. What we're going to talk about today, guys, is obviously, as you can see from the introduction, we're going to talk about both striped bass here in the Northeast and other parts of the country, and casting to them and casting in general, because I want to pick his brain on how we can catch more striped bass and how we can be better fly casters. So again, John, thanks for being with us, man.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about your past. Now, how did you originally start getting involved in, writing and casting instruction?
Well, my dad was a printing broker, and one of his clients was Winchester. My dad was not an outdoorsman. I grew up in Manhattan, and I was taken to the sportsman show at the Coliseum in a wheelchair because I had a 5-year stint while my hip hardened. And people looked at me and said, well, maybe he won't be a football player, but he can be in the outdoors. So an outdoor educator named Ellis Newman, who had a camp in the Catskills that had hunting and fishing for handicap, saw me and taught me how to fly cast at age 7. And
wow,
my dad's clients at Winchester also felt sorry for me, I guess. And I have pictures of me getting my first .22 when I was 7 years old, and I'm happy. I have the Winchester box in my lap in the wheelchair on 77th Street. And then my dad bought a farm in New Jersey, and it had a pond. We dug a pond with a spring in it. We stocked it with trout. We got one of John Olin's field trial Labradors, and Hank Hunter, who was head of PR for Winchester, taught me how to shoot and everything. So I started off doing that. My dad brought me fly rods from Abercrombie & Fitch near his office. He was a one-man operation. And I knew that there were experts in writing because my dad published the public relations bulletin for Winchester, had experts who would hunt around the world, and also fishing. They had a fishing division too for tackle. So my dad never saw it coming, but I wanted to write. I liked the graphics of his printing. He used to take me to printing presses to do quality control for his clients. And I hunted and fished, and the doctors said, well, have a normal life. You'll need a hip replacement when you're 65. And so I actually just did it, and I'm paddleboarding and skating and hosting fishing trips now. But I spent most of my life racing snowmobiles, fishing, hunting, and I've dedicated it to fly fishing. I teach fly casting full-time and write about it. I've written about it in various magazines and had a stint on a TV show, which I think you probably asked me about earlier.
Sure. So this is mostly around New Jersey, or where was it before?
Well, actually, it's funny because our farm, my dad decided to buy raw farmland in Franklin Township, 10 minutes from the Doubletree where we used to do the show. So it's ironic that I was tested for my master's exam like 40 years later, 10 minutes from where I grew up and hunted and fished. And then they moved the show here to Edison. But so at age 11, we moved to New Jersey. And then since then, I've lived in various states, Florida, Iowa, Minnesota, spent a lot of time in Canada, learned from a lot of different outdoorsmen.
That's amazing. Well, sounds good. And so how did you get your first start into professional fly casting? I mean, I know you've done some tournaments, you studied under the RaJeffs. Talk about your experience with kind of learning how to be a professional fly caster.
I was interested in teaching, and I got involved with the Federation of Fly Fishers, who went through 3 name iterations. I first got my basic certification, and then 10 years later got my master's certification. But as far as tournament casting goes, in around 2003, I was so interested in following the squid run in conjunction to my striper fishing and throwing 14-inch flies that I wanted to seek out the best teachers for throwing the farthest distances, and that would be people from the Golden Gate Club. Macaulay Lord, who's a great friend who wrote the foreword to my first book, told me to go see Chris Korich. Chris Korich wouldn't answer his phone and he was busy for 2 or 3 years. And then next on Macaulay's list was Tim RaJeff. So I contacted Tim and he gave me some lessons, and I then hooked up with Steve and went to the first tournament in 2003 with one fly rod. And Chris Korich says, "Oh, you have to compete. I just wanted to practice or maybe get a lesson from somebody. This is, flying 3,000 miles. So they made me compete. I placed in the middle of the pack, and then they said, you have to come back. So I did 3 events, the 3 distance fly events the next year, then 3 distance and 3 accuracy after that, and then the 6 plug events. So I was doing the 12 recognized events of the American Casting Association. At the same time,
What's a plug event?
they do accuracy and distance with spin or we call it revolving spool. So the organization covers all tackle. There are combination scores for grand all around or all fly, all plug. And a lot of people, even
Okay, so basically conventional.
Yeah, but one might specifically say you can only use spin, or one's only bait casting.
Right.
And they have regulations for the flies, for plugs, for the lines and the rods, so that it's a level playing field. So I was doing all 12 events, and there are people who don't plug fish who just do it because it used to be a week-long event.
Right.
And we had one time 26 clubs, but when I was competing, it was, I think, 12 clubs. And we'd rotate it in different clubs around the country. And that gives you a great opportunity to learn from other members. And then Steve RaJeff said, this is an aging organization. It's kind of dying out. I know you've rebuilt a TU chapter in New York City. Could you do something similar? So I said, Steve, I'll help out. So I became the vice president for 4 years, and I became the president for 4 years, and tried to fundraise. And I changed it to a 501c3 so we could raise money and do events for kids and education around the country instead of being just a social club.
So when you were the president, what was the club name at that time?
It started off, there's been, I think, 4 different names, but it was still the ACA since 1961.
Okay.
Yeah.
The American Casting Association.
Yeah, ACA.
And is that kind of founded by the RaJeffs?
No, it was founded in 1909 as NASAC and then NAAC. There was
all
these
different names.
Yeah, and every
1909.
generation. Yes, just like I joined.
Why casting back then? I mean, I know we have a long history back then, but who was actually creating a club about casting back then?
Well, the Anglers Club, for example, had tournaments in the Harlem Mere. That's one of the reasons why when Joan Wolf's third husband, Ted Rogowski, asked me to join, I said yes, because I want to connect membership with the ACA so they can remember their history. They've got silver bowls and gear from that era and books. There's books about it. Men with bow ties and jackets and women in long dresses would compete in 2-hand overhead salmon. I think it's James Henshaw who wrote the Gamey Black Bass was there, and he was a tournament caster. So, and there's so much history with tackle and technique development that I needed to learn more, try to connect like organizations, to try. My goal was not to let American outdoor tradition fail. That's why I fought for the TU chapter, why I helped. I'm not a competitive person, and I don't really believe in competitive fishing. I do things for its intrinsic value, mainly. But I wanted it not to die because I think it's American heritage.
For sure. In your opinion, is there a GOAT? Is there a greatest of all time fly caster?
Well, I'm prejudiced, but quantitatively, Steve RaJeff has been a world champ. And if you look at people's casts, and if I was trained as an international judge and I've scored events, I think that Steve is the best. And it's so funny because you have other people that are technicians that can explain everything and want to explain everything. And Chris Korich, who's one of those people, he's like a sports instructor and has taught champions, including Maxine McCormick. would say he doesn't even remember what he's doing. He just does it with perfection.
Tell our folks a little bio of Steve RaJeff as far as a little bit of his history and a little bit of what he's up to right now, just because some people may not know that name.
It's funny because he went to the same high school as my mother, Lowell, in San Francisco, and I gave him one of my mother's old history books from the school. But he grew up in San Francisco. He wanted to be a MBA, I believe, and he likes jazz music. He guided. Of course, he and those other two boys at the club, his brother Tim and Chris, were tormenting the older guys, and they thought it would be better to teach them how to cast correctly than for them to throw rocks in the pool. So they competed and they became world champions all over the place. And they went off. Tim and Steve went guiding. Chris went into the ski industry. Tim founded RaJeff Sports. And as I wrote in Fly Fisher magazine, his brother Steve financed Echo and RaJeff Sports, even though he was a competitor, because he's that kind of guy. He's always helped everybody. One brother went to be an entrepreneur. Steve wanted to fish and wanted to work for Loomis, and he retired, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. He didn't have his own children, but his wife Ellen had kids, so he became a new grandfather. And it's funny because Tim doesn't have any kids, and Steve is now a happy grandfather. He likes to spend time, and he has a casting pool at his place. And I haven't talked to him for a couple months, but he's enjoying life, and we're both about the same age.
Are they both involved with Echo?
No, Tim sold it to his two employees, Jared and Jamie.
Okay.
And Steve left G. Loomis. It's been owned by Shimano for a long time. Steve still gets back into the factory to help make the custom blanks for the American Casting Association, because you can't just go buy them, and they're very special. They're not, you can't fish with them, really, the distance blanks.
Okay.
So he has a little of a hobby doing that. He doesn't travel like he used to for the competitions, but he still likes to fish. And I hope to fish with him again. We've fished before, and
sounds fun.
Very much, yeah.
So when you said you were a judge, an international judge for these casting competitions,
I was trained for it. I actually didn't go to Europe and go do that, but I wanted to be included in the pool in case I had to.
I see.
But I wanted to. But I was a judge many times in accuracy and distance for ACA and national championships and at the member clubs.
What goes into the score of a casting competition as a judge, from a judge's perspective?
Well, you have to have good vision, and you have to be able to make decisions based on we work on a demerit system. So let's say in accuracy we do. You start off with 100. So if you miss it within a foot, it's a 3-point demerit, or if you tick while you're false casting, it's a 3-point demerit. So instead of,
oh my goodness, I'd have no points.
there's a
what happens if you catch a tree with your fly?
Well, I don't. It's a timed event. A lot of the actually is timed, so you may go to 85. I think is the bottom score.
Okay.
It's been quite a few years since I've competed, and I'm still the webmaster.
Okay.
And still doing some work for them, but I spent 10 years after working in television, and my parents were getting elderly, and I decided to give back to 2 organizations since I felt that I'd had a lot of opportunities. So conservation was important, and I tie my work with ACA into that too, is trying to get people, for whatever reason, to fish and then become stewards of their resources and be aware of nature and so forth. So it's outdoors, and so I'm still hoping that they will continue forever.
Sure. Before we get into some of the striper stuff, John, what can we tell our listeners and our viewers about some things to think about to improve their cast? I know we can't give a casting lesson, and it's certainly hard here on a podcast to instruct people, but you see common mistakes.
And you probably know that I was the last demonstrator at the last show, Marlboro, and I gave a casting demo called Curing Faults.
Yeah.
So I wanted to help people, and as I put in the intro, I'm going to give you like the kitchen sink, and you might not have all these faults. You may only have one that's holding you back. And a fault is something that you're doing in your casting that prevents you from being accurate or to be able to attain the distance you want under those conditions. I've done this for 20 years, and I've done groups. I've done a lot of free lessons for groups and tons of private lessons. So I generally see beginners to intermediate people not able to control loop size. So they use too much wrist. In general, casters that I've seen use too much motion in their casting and aren't efficient. And if they do less, but do it with the correct stopping points and trajectory and the amount of acceleration, their loops will tighten, their accuracy will be better, and they'll be able to sustain that for a full day's fishing. People are flailing too much. They think that you have to, for short cast, have to move a lot. And with hunting for fish, let's say trout, wading, you don't want to send ripples, so just use your upper body. If you want to be precise and have good accuracy, have the ability to cast a tight loop if you want to, or if you're throwing a tandem or a clouser, to throw a wider, slower loop so that you don't get hit or you don't crack the whip and lose your equipment. That's like the first thing. Then there's tailing loops. There's people who have poor timing in their back cast, people who don't have a symmetrical haul, they're double hauling. There are a million things, and I usually look at casters, if it's one-on-one, and I try to do a triage so that I fix the worst thing first.
Right.
And I have a sort of a program of what things to teach them in order. You don't want to teach them distance the first day. It's line control, maybe a roll cast, pick up, lay down, and then loop control, and then carrying ahead, and then it's shortening and lengthening, then it's slipping, and then it's hauling, and then it's body, and there's so many things, and you do that as building blocks.
That sounds super fun.
Oh, it is.
I would love to spend some time with you in the water.
Actually, most of the teaching is done on grass because you can orient yourself to the wind. The instructor can walk around and look at your tracking. Tracking is important so the loop doesn't fail. You should move the rod in overhead casting in one plane in the back cast and the forward cast. And so I can get behind you, or I can put a clothesline down so you can have a reference to lay down a forward or back cast, so you can see yourself. A lot of this is about being aware of your own body movements and acceleration. And a lot of people, it varies with individuals. Proprioception, the amount of acceleration, and what you're actually doing. And sometimes you have to videotape somebody and show it to them, and then they have an aha moment where it's like, you're using too much wrist. Oh, no, I'm not. You show them a 5-second video, say, oh my God, I'm using too much wrist. And then, when they believe it, then they can sometimes control it themselves.
Yeah, or not letting it lay out in the back and not waiting for it to lay out behind you.
Yeah, that's a timing thing. Either they change direction without a long enough pause, or they change direction too soon. It's either going to crack the whip, or gravity's going to create slack and change the relationship between that back cast and the intended forward cast, because the back cast is the setup for the forward cast. If the back cast isn't good, you usually don't have a good forward cast.
How would you recommend each of these books? So the ACA's Beginner's Guide to Fly Casting versus Fly Casting Finesse. Who are these intended for?
Well, simply enough, the Beginner's Guide is for beginners, and it'll teach you from actually the beginning of you just unpack. There's a picture of unpacking like a plastic wrap rod, how to put it together properly, how to thread the line in the guides, arbor knots, pick up and lay down, roll cast. So that is basic. There are pictures of Chris Korich right there talking about the top position and the stop and a false cast, and then following it down to the bottom position. Natural gravity assisted stroke. And it's so simple, and people are over rotating and flailing, but generally,
like a Gary Borger pantomime, he says, to do the pantomime.
That's very effective. I mean, that's how
banging a nail or into the tree or something.
I tell people that there's a nail in a table.
Okay.
And you're hammering it in for the stop.
Well, that's fantastic. And then the Finesse book, who would that be targeted towards?
That's intermediate to advanced.
Okay.
And there's a lot of reference in there to the history of casts, because I wanted to inspire people to try to problem solve presentation and other situations to try to invent something new. Spade casts were invented because of obstacles.
Right.
Scandinavia and talking about different areas of casting, whether it's accuracy, whether it's flats fishing and timing and wind, tournament, a little bit of tournament casting. There's some physics in there, but every single illustration in that book is a tracing from a photograph.
Okay.
Macaulay Lord, who wrote the L.O. Bean Fly Casting Handbook, said, John, for your illustrations, either use all photography or show your artist photos, because otherwise, if it's just your verbal direction, it's not going to be real in the real world.
Got it.
And you can misrepresent a cast. So every single picture of me, or every single drawing, even the tiniest ones, are vector art from larger photographs that I clunked down. And that shape of the line actually happened when Chris Thiesing took pictures of me for months out in places.
Yeah. I like how you have like grips here and you show the different grips, because someone might just be grabbing the rod and might have developed a bad habit already.
Well, grips aren't super important, in my opinion.
Okay.
That there are certain grips that can help you, like Gary or George, of course, likes a distal grip or finger on top.
Right.
George likes it for sensitivity on the blank for nymphing. And Gary likes it because it helps limit wrist rotation. Lee Wolf used to do that. But looking at American Casting Association and ICSF in Europe, and I have cast with a lot of those people in Europe, the best casters generally use a V grip, but I don't see any distance results different from thumb on top versus V grip. Although Joan cited a doctor in the South, I don't remember his name, who said that the thumb on top was the best anatomical way to do it. I talked to Dr. Gordy Hill, who's a master instructor and well regarded, and other people, and we decided that thumb on top versus the key or V grip is virtually indistinguishable anatomically, and I've seen it in the results, and it's really negligible. But the main thing is, do not hold a rod at right angle to your palm. You want to have, Chris Court calls it the skeletal grip, from the bone here to the bone in your index finger on like a 45-degree angle.
Right. So from the kind of the fleshy part of the
if you hold it at right angle and death grip it, you're already opening your back cast. So, and not a tight grip, and you only increase tension to stop the rod and let the rod flexibility absorb the vibration. Tim RaJeff has a big thing. He'll put a rod on a like a half door and twang the end of it. And if you're holding it really tight, like your teeth will fall out. But if you hold it loosely, the rod will counterflex and rebound quickly and not transmit as much vibration to your hands. So being relaxed when you're casting, even when you're doing distance. When someone says, wow, how does he do it? It looks so easy. It's because he's not tense and he's not overpowering it. It's all technique and timing and experience.
Do you have one tip that you can say, hey, you can improve your distance if you just worked on this?
Prerequisite is that they're going to have a tight loop. So tighten your loop, make it aerodynamic. A wide loop is like the front of a bus. A tight loop is like the front of an Exocet missile. So
tighter loop.
Yeah. And that also works to counter wind that's in your face, not a side wind.
What's the fastest way to make a tighter loop? How do you create a tighter loop?
If you're casting a wide loop, I would make the stops closer together, which makes the arc that you're traveling through with the rod smaller. Arc is the change in angle measured in the butt from stop to stop. So most of the students, let's say if they are casting with stops out here, I have them bring their stops closer together. Now, if you're trout fishing, let's say, or if you're casting fairly short, you generally want to have a high back cast and a low forward cast. So the trajectory is going to be on an angle, and your back cast is 180 degrees from your forward cast. So the stops aren't here. It's sort of a sector. But if you're way wide, bring them closer together. Then there's a point of diminishing returns, after which you'll start to throw a fault called a tailing loop, because it makes you have to accelerate too abruptly and the rod bends and goes boink. When the rod tip bends too fast and then straightens, the line follows it. In the advanced book, we took one of my CI casters that I was working with, a certified instructor, in the dark, and put a couple Canon strobes out at 40 flashes per second. We did wide loops, tailing loops, and perfect loops, so you could see the rod every 3 inches, so you can see the faults being born.
Wow. Well, that is some great stuff, guys. Check out John's books. You can find them on Amazon and at the fly fishing shows. We're talking about a trophy striped bass. He just wrote this incredible book. It's a stackpole book, guys, so you know it's done well. John, what was the impetus to start a new book about trophy striped bass? I mean, there's 1,000 books on striped bass out on the marketplace, and this is definitely exceptional. But what was the motivation to have another book about striped bass?
In the 2000s, when I bought my boat, I met Brad Burns, who started Stripers Forever, and I said, Brad, how do you catch 45, 48-inch fish on flies? He said, well, I recommend you follow the squid run, and I'll give you some names of some guides to go learn about this. So I started specializing just in big fish after catching thousands of small fish along the beach before I got my boat. And I just finished shooting Hunt for Big Fish with Larry Dahlberg and writing for Canadian Sport Fishing about big fish. So I was really specializing in big fish, and there's a way to exclude small fish. I spent 12 years fishing with Captain Steve Belfleur, who's a famous Connecticut captain, fishes Washoe Reef area to the rips to Fisher Sound. And every year I'd catch the biggest fish on the boat, basically, of the season, because using monster flies. And I had just finished learning how to do the tournament casting from the RaJeffs and competed at ACA, American Casting Association. I learned that. I sought them out just to be able to throw big flies, and we have 3 shooting head events. There was nobody in the East who could compare it. Those techniques were developed for king salmon and steelhead in the Delta through the Northern California, and Dan Blanton and there's a couple guys who spent their entire lives just throwing shooting heads and then competing and developing tackle. And so I wrote an article for Fly Fisher magazine called Squid in the Rips. And I actually, we divided it in 2 parts because the editor allowed me to write part on the biology and behavior of the longfin squid. And I had consulted with Dr. Roger Hanlon at Woods Hole, and he helped actually proofread the scientific part after so much interviewing. And then a few years later, I started following the reemergence of the Miramichi striper population. There's a native population in that famous salmon river. And I started telling fly fishermen about it, and they heard conflicting information, but I finally brought the proof in and wrote an article for it, and Ross Pennell was very grateful because the story was about climate change and adaptation and the survivability of striped bass and this great fishery. And so that was the second striper article for fly fishermen, and I contributed some things to other striper authors. And so we were at the fly fishing show, and here's Jay Nichols and Ross Purnell, and Ross said, "Oh, have you seen John's casting book?" "Oh, how did I miss that?" "Oh, he writes about stripers." "Oh, yeah, I'd like to write a striper book." He says, "I'll give you a contract on Monday." That was a long time ago, and I was late on delivering. COVID happened.
That's a theme with the books and the authors.
Yeah.
So I think they're used to it.
Yeah, they were very lenient. I appreciate that. So some captains said, "John, you can't write a book about this because it's going to target female striped bass, and then they're precious." And then COVID happened. I said, "Well, I don't want to encourage people to go jump in Suburbans and go up and down the coast together and transmit a disease. So I'm going to hold off." And then at the same time, I was still working on the book, and a head of marine science here at Monmouth University, John Tiedemann, gave me folders on a disc of all the research that I asked for on striped bass. And then in their references, there were a lot more. So I spent 2 years just reading and taking notes for the first 50 pages. So it took me 5 years full time to write this book. And then
Wow.
to make good maps, there's extremely complex software from the Esri company, I think, that they use for military and industry, and it takes a long time to learn it. But I have sort of a graphics and photographic background, so I took JPEGs from the USGS and traced them with a stylus and a tablet, and then I took NOAA charts. NOAA is no longer selling paper charts. You can download them and print them yourself or send it to a service. And I found you couldn't actually work with them in any other program and customize them. But I sort of hacked them so that I took off all the decoration, every aid to navigation, and changed the fonts and created my own color code for depths. I wanted it to enable anglers to visualize where they want to fish based on my descriptions of estuary current, tidal current, depth, rock, different structure.
That's amazing.
So it took 2 days per illustration. So if there's 35 general maps and then 35 hotspots, which are charts with depth, that's 150 days alone. And I think if I hired somebody, it probably costs $40,000, and they would do it in short time and use Esri. But I'm not sure that I'd get exactly what I wanted. I did actually get exactly what I wanted.
That's awesome. Now, did you have to credit them or license these?
No, this is free. This is the U.S. government giving us maps for navigational use. These are not for navigation. These are just for fishing.
Okay.
And I mentioned that, I think, in the
No, it's amazing. And just, I mean, as flipping through this book, the quality of the production, I can see if somebody was just picking up saltwater fishing or striper fishing for the first time, or as a trout fisherman and wants to do striper fishing, I could see this easily becoming the new Bible on striper fishing, because it really covers the entire spectrum of what you need to do, where you need to go, the flies you need to use, the knots you need to use. I mean, you've covered absolutely everything. What I can see here, I need to rebuild my entire striper fly box. I mean, I spend so much time trout fishing or Patagonia or Iceland or the Amazon. I just rebuilt 2 giant Amazon boxes to take for the peacock bass. But when I come home to Boston, often I'm just with family, so I won't do as much striper fishing. But I want to do more, but I know my fly box is super dated. You know, it has the, all the old stuff that you do, the Clouser minnows and a lot of the different streamers that you would use. But I mean, I could see here you get a beast squid, you've got a popper mullet, you've got a Nelson mackerel, a flatwing mackerel. I mean, you got the pop sluggo flies, you got the pop lip flies. I mean, you could easily take this book and connect with Ben Wally,
who did most flies.
And he is an amazing tyer. His flies are absolutely gorgeous and effective. You could also just work with this book and Ben Wally and create an amazing fly.
And Scott Stryker and King and Dave Nelson. There's a lot of contributors that Bob Popovich told me to use instead of his flies,
right? Because
he wanted to have these people spotlighted.
That's awesome.
Very generous of him to do that.
When it comes to stripers, like, what is their range? I know it's traditionally the Chesapeake where they'll spawn and then they'll go up to where it's normally Maine, but now we're hearing that they're going up even further, up into the Ristigouche or the Miramichi.
No. The Labrador Current prevents that. There's no mixing of the stocks.
Okay.
From the U.S. to Miramichi, which is in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. They can't get around Cape Breton.
Okay.
It's like 30-degree currents. And if you look at the science, the genetics of the Miramichi strain, which is there are 2 strains in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I'm going to include the St. Lawrence stock because they're rounding the corner on the north of the Gaspé, and they're going to mix. But there's a stock in the St. Lawrence that was almost extirpated. It's native. It was a stock in the Miramichi that's native and almost extirpated from commercial fishing. And those are genetically unique from all of the United States strains. There are 4 Atlantic stocks of significance, and the biggest fish are in the middle of the range because of temperature. There are stripers in Florida. And then those of the far north, traditionally when grow that big. Because of climate change in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence is warming, so they're living longer, and all of a sudden we're seeing the sizes every year get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's more bait, more movement to the bait. So you have the Shubenacadie and the Annapolis and the St. John in the Bay of Fundy that are traditional spawning rivers. St. John has a dam that prevents any real production. I think the Annapolis doesn't have much. And there's one little river in Nova Scotia that has some in the Bay of Fundy. So there's 4 Atlantic stocks. The Albemarle River, Roanoke Sound in Carolina. And then you have the Chesapeake with 4 tributaries. Then you have the Delaware. Then you have the Hudson. There's no viable production in America to the north of that. Stripers don't always spawn every year, and they're faithful when they do spawn. They'll go back to their natal river and spawn. And there are little genetic differences between the stocks. But they will, on their southerly migration, sometimes find northern rivers and stay over a year or two, and then suddenly go home. So you'll find spawning size fish in the Housatonic or the Kennebec. It doesn't mean that they spawn there. And I think that there have been some juveniles found further north than they should be on the range of the Hudson of mature fish, and the males can recruit and go coastal at about 8 inches. So there are some that are smaller than that. I think that have been found further north around rivers that used to be pretty productive pre-industrial. But I think it's what I call the perfect storm, when a couple individuals get together, when the flows and the salinity and temperature are just right, and a couple pairs might. But if you look at the results of commercial bait seiners or all the states that are trawling and doing studies, you don't see thousands of them anywhere that are farther north than the Hudson.
Interesting. Well, I want to come back and talk about the western part of our country, because we have stripers in the San Francisco Bay. So
yes.
I want to talk about this. We're talking about stripers. John, besides this East Coast, Northern Atlantic area for finding stripers, what are some other areas in the country that you can go striper fishing?
Canyon Lake in Texas, the Hiawassee in several states, Tennessee, and then the West Coast stripers in the Delta, and San Luis Reservoir and O'Neill Forebay. So you have reservoirs with tailwaters in the south, and then the Delta that was transplanted. The stripers were transplanted in the 1800s.
How do they transplant a stripe?
They took them on trains out to California.
With like oxygenated water, or?
I don't think they needed to oxygenate. I don't even know if they probably had medical technology, but I don't know the exact care and route. If you do it in the fall, I imagine that colder water would hold more oxygen. They may have had to exchange water. They, stripers can also exist in fresh water. I don't know if they started them off in fresh and then desalinated it or kept kept sea salt. I don't know about that exact scientific process, but it made it out there and they were successful.
I've always wondered how they're catching stripers in these freshwater areas like Texas. I mean, does it just like a steelhead can just kind of change its anatomy to have salt or not have salt?
Yes, there are places along the coast where back in the Ice Age they would become landlocked, or they'd be in rivers. So they can adapt to both habitats, and they can reproduce under certain conditions in still water enclosures. But they're basically they spawn at the head of tide in coastal estuaries when the water is about 60 degrees, and if the flow is too high, the larvae are usually carried too fast downstream and predators get them. If the flow is too slow, it sinks into muck and they die. So three things have to be just about perfect, and they'll wait and ripen until it's just right. And the males are always ready, of course.
Yeah.
But when the females go to that point, then they can spawn.
So here in the Northeast, I mean, what would be some tactics to catching more stripers?
Well, my book isn't about more; it's about larger. How to exclude catching small ones? Because
Okay.
let's say you're on a rip and you use a small fly, you'll catch every fish in the rip. But it takes time to catch a 5-pounder, and you got to position with the boat. So if you use a 14-inch fly, the small ones will strike, but they won't get hooked. But the big ones will get hooked, and you have the tackle to handle them. So it's fishing where the big fish are. They segregate by size when they post spawn, and they migrate generally north. And the bigger females generally like water that's colder than younger stripers. And Chesapeake stock historically travels the farthest. They will travel all the way up to New Brunswick, Canada, let's say, as a maximum. So in the summertime, when the water gets too hot, you want to go north. Maine is a very good place. Gulf of Maine and South Shore, North Shore. You know, the Chesapeake strain and Delaware follow sort of a route. They go in the summertime, or spring rather, they'll go up the coast and hit schools of bunker. Some will stay put. I mean, sometimes the Hudson fish will stay south of Sandy Hook, you know, the mouth of the river. But generally they'll go north, and the Chesapeake fish will go all the way. And when your flats fishing gets nocturnal, if you go to Casco Bay in Maine and places like that, you can find good July fishing, let's say.
Okay. So what would be some flies? I mean, you have 50 plus 60. I don't know how many flies are in your book that are
50 that are recommended.
Wow, I hit it right on the head. I did. Yeah, not bad. So from the 50, can you name like 2 or 3 or 4 that you would kind of stand out if somebody wanted to just start with a little kit?
Well, you also have to match the lines, and you have to have the ability to cast large flies. 60% of the diet of big stripers is menhaden. So let's just say the beast fly is my go-to fly because it's easier to cast in its size than any previous fly, I think. So a beast fly. And also, there are, let's see now, imitating river herring, bucktail deceivers, bulkhead deceivers. You can change the profile to change the bait that's imitated. A crab pot for the invasive green crab. In following the northern shrimp, there's a couple patterns that a guide in Maine, Mike Roy, ties. He I don't remember the names. They're sort of a local fly. There's an articulated lobster that James Brown in Maine ties for the lobster. You know, if you're in Jersey, you don't think of lobsters as being big striper forage, but up there on those ledges, lobster is important. Pollock flies up there are important. Even older flies, Steve Farrar's high tie, which is a New Jersey fly, is still a top fly. The hollow fly, 5 inches long, is a perfect peanut bunker fly. There's a cascading order with striped bass diet. So if they can't find a 2-pound bunker, they go to the next available high protein oily fish. So they'll go, let's say if there's no bunker, they'll go maybe to river herring or to mackerel, squid. And so you have to sort of match the hatch, but try to find the schools of bait fish and look at the birds that are preying upon them. So common terns usually eat small bait and usually small fish. You go to gulls and gannets and blackbacks, especially blackbacks. You see blackbacks on a rip in May, and you're pretty much guaranteed there's probably squid there.
Sure.
And it gets me excited.
Well, that sounds absolutely awesome, John. It's been an absolute blast having you on the Fly Fishing Journeys podcast. This is a beautiful book. Fly fishing for trophy striped bass. We're actually excluding the smaller ones, and we're hunting for the giant ones.
That's right.
That is awesome. What is the best way to find this book, John?
I like local tackle shops, fly shops.
Okay.
Saltwater Edge, Complete Angler, Lost Coast out in San Francisco, and others up and down the coast. I'm doing some book signings. Amazon has it, of course.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to deliver it for you.
What about if they want a signed copy?
The Fly Fishing Show, I'll be Atlanta, Pleasanton, and Lancaster. those two wonderful fly shops I mentioned have signed copies, hopefully. And I'm also doing a signing up in Maine in March at Eldridge Brothers Fly Shop.
Phenomenal.
And other places.
Do you have a website or an Instagram we might point people to?
It's funny you should ask. I happen to have one at fieldflyfishing.com.
That's phenomenal. Fieldflyfishing.com and Instagram?
Instagram, Field Fly Fishing, John Field on Facebook.
Okay.
And I'm actually hosting striper trips this year.
Phenomenal.
In funny places. The Gaspé Peninsula in Quebec or the Miramichi River.
I heard it's pretty good up there.
Oh, it's Blue Planet. Incredible to see 1 million striped bass spawning at the same time right next to your rod tip.
It's a little treat there, like a little bonus for you guys. So, John, it's been an absolute blast having you on the podcast, man. Thank you so much. Congratulations on this beautiful book.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Fly Fishing Journeys with your host, Rob Giannino. To be notified of new episodes, subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts. You can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. For past episodes, check out flyfishingjourneys.com. Fly fishing is a journey, and we're glad you're on this journey with us.